Hello friends, this is Balachandran DC and today we are going to discuss this important topic, that is group of 7 countries, the G7 countries. In today's video, we'll discuss about what are the countries, what are the members of this G7 grouping, whether India is a member of this G7 grouping or not, and what are the functions of this G7 grouping, and what are the challenges and concerns this G7 grouping is facing nowadays. And then we will focus on what is the major difference between G7 and G20. Then finally, we'll discuss few points about the G7 Summit 2024 that is happening in Italy right now. So we'll get into the video. So first of all, group of 7 countries. So this group of 7 countries was formed in the year 1975 as an intergovernmental organization. So if you see, basically this is a group of rich countries, the advanced economies or rich countries in the world. They formed this group in 1975. And who are all the members? The most important aspect about this is we should know who are all the members. So we have US, Canada, then we have UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. So 4 countries in Europe, Japan, then US and Canada. So these are the 7 countries that are part of G7. And this group meets annually, and what they do, they discuss important global issues, the global economic issues, then environmental aspects, climate change, terrorism, etc. One important aspect about this group is they do not have a formal constitution, or it is an informal grouping. You can say it is not a formal organization, it is an informal grouping, and they do not have a fixed headquarters. So there is no fixed headquarters for G7. That is very important. As it is not a formal grouping, the decisions taken in this summits are not binding on those leaders who are participating in this. So the decisions of G7 are not binding. That is very important. So next question is whether China is a member. No, China is not a member. So why China is not a member of G7, though China is the world's second largest economy? So you might get this question. If you see the per capita income of China, as you know, China is second largest in population. Though it is the second largest global economy, its per capita income is very less compared to these advanced economies. So that's why China cannot be considered as a rich country or advanced economy. So China is not part of G7. What about India? India is also not a member of G7 for the same reason. Though we are the 5th largest economy, our per capita income is very less compared to the G7 countries. But other important aspect to note here is all the G7 countries are also members of G20. Not only the G7 countries, the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, all these countries are part of G20. So when we say G20, it includes G7, it includes BRICS and other countries. So you should be clear about this aspect. So if you see, till 1997, it was only G7, but in the year 1997, Russia was added to the group of 7 countries. So in 1997, this group became G8, the group of 8, including Russia. And Russia remained part of G8 till the year 2014. But Russia was expelled from this group of 8 in the year 2014 after Russia annexed the Crimea region of Ukraine. So now again G8 has become G7 since 2014 after Russia was expelled. So now we'll discuss about few points regarding the summit level meeting. So first of all, what are these summits? Summits are nothing but the meeting at the highest level. The head of state of the countries or the head of government of the countries, they meet and they take important decisions. So that is called as a summit. So if you see this G7 summit that happens annually and it happens on a rotation basis. Remember we discussed that G7 does not have a fixed headquarters. So every year the summit happens on a rotation basis in its member countries. So this year, as you know, it is happening in Italy. And the host country, like this year in 2024, the host country is Italy. And the host country holds the presidency of G7. So they are the head for that year, the G7 presidency. And they set the agenda for the year. So what is this agenda? So what are the issues they are going to discuss? What are the important decisions they are going to take? So all that will be set by the host country. So this year it will be Italy. And another important aspect is this host country also can invite other countries which are not part of G7 for their summit meeting, which is also called as the G7 outreach. So the G7 outreach is nothing but the host country can invite other members, other countries who are not members of G7 for this discussion, for this interaction. So that is called as G7 outreach. As we discussed earlier, India is not a member of G7. India has been invited this year for G7 outreach. So who are all the countries that can be invited to this summit? That decision will be taken by the host country every year. So if you see this year, along with India, there are around 11 countries that have been invited by Italy for G7 outreach. And not only the leaders of other countries, but leaders from important global organizations like IMF, World Bank, the United Nations, European Union, they are also invited for this summit participation. So now coming to what are the challenges and concerns that the group of 7 faces. If you see in the recent times, G7 has been criticized for not being representative of the present global order, whether it is the present global politics or global economics. The G7, the group, does not reflect the present scenario. So that is a major criticism. So why is it so? Remember, the group was formed in the year 1975, but only in the last 10-15 years it has been criticized for not being very reflective of the ground realities. So in fact, it is considered as an outdated group of countries. The main reason for that is this group does not include emerging economies. That means the developing countries. As we discussed, G7 is a group of advanced economies, developed countries. So they do not include the developing economies. And today, if you see, um, the developing economies, the emerging economies, they play a crucial role in many global aspects. You would have seen whether in addressing the COVID pandemic or environmental challenges, addressing climate change. So all these aspects and trade negotiations, WTO and all this, if you see developing economies, the importance of developing economies has grown in the recent times. So that's why this group now is considered as an outdated group as it does not have emerging economies. And another important point is it is not very representative. Many continents are not represented in G7. There are no members from Africa, there are no members from Latin America, and even the entire southern hemisphere is not represented in G7. So these are the major challenges. That's why G7 is considered as outdated grouping. So now we'll see what are the major differences between the group of 7 and group of 20, that is the G20. First most important difference is the members. The G20 has 20 members. That means it is more representative. It represents the various continents compared to G7. So G20 includes all the members of G7 as well as the BRICS members. Apart from that, countries like South Africa, countries like Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, these are all part of G20, which is not the case in G7. And another important aspect we should know is that G20, it is group of 20 countries. Actually, if you see, it's only 19 countries plus European Union. So European Union is the 20th member of G20. And in the year 2023, last year, African Union has been added to G20. So that is very important, you should remember. So now not only European Union, African Union is also part of G20 apart from the other 19 countries. So you can go through these countries who are all the members of G20, which is very important. So other major difference is the share in global economy. If you see the G20 members, the cumulative GDP of G20 members, it equals around 80% of the world GDP. So 80% of world's GDP represented by only 20 countries. So that is the weightage of G20. So that's why G20 has become more prominent than G7, because now G7 economies contribution is only 40%. If you add G7 countries GDP, it is only 40% of global GDP, whereas G20 it is 80% of global GDP. So that's why we say now G7 has become outdated compared to G20. And not only that, G20 has become an important forum where wide-ranging issues have been discussed, not only the economic aspects, but primarily if you see G7, most of the economic issues are given more importance there. But in G20, not only economic issues, environmental issues, terrorism, climate change, trade-related issues, WTO, and international security, international law. So all these aspects have been discussed in G20. So now coming to the present context, why we are discussing about G7. So Prime Minister Modi is attending the G7 outreach summit in Italy. So apart from India, there are 10 other countries. They are also being invited by Italy to attend this G7 outreach meeting. So this year G7 summit is being held in Italy, and what are the issues they are going to discuss, likely discuss this year? Two major issues. One is the ongoing war in Ukraine and the conflict in Gaza. So these will be the major focus areas. So that will be discussed. The global leaders will be discussing in this year's G7 summit. So if you are preparing for UPSC prelims, especially prelims, you should be thorough with who are all the members of G7 and who are all the members of G20, and whether India is a member or not. So India is a member of G20 but not G7, and China is also a member of G20 but not G7. So these aspects you should be aware of.